afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I guess it is afternoon now. Welcome to the Monday, May 24th meeting of the Transportation Planning and Environment Committee. We have a pretty full agenda today, so we'll want to get right to it. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and ask for introductions of our committee members and staff and anyone else on the phone. I'm Julie Eisel, Mayor Pro Tem and serving at large, and as chair of this committee. Anyone else online? If you would go ahead and go first, then we'll go to the room.
Ed Driggs, committee member.
Hello, everyone. Matt Newton, committee member.
Larkin Eggleston, committee vice chair.
Braxton Winston, committee member.
You want to, in the room, go ahead and start at one end.
John Lewis, Executive Director, Charlotte Area Transit System.
Agustin Rodriguez, Planning Department, CRTPO Division.
Jason Lawrence, Charlotte Area Transit System, Senior Planner.
Taiwo Jaoba, City Manager's Office, and Planning Director.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
Monica Holmes, Planning Department.
Lynn Alexander, Charlotte DOT.
Okay, if that's everybody, we'll go ahead and get started. I want to apologize that I'm not there in person today. I was careening into Charlotte as fast as I could from Virginia for my daughter's graduation this morning, so graduated last night. So I apologize I'm not there in person, but I'm looking forward to the conversation. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Assistant City Director, Taiwo Jawoba, to introduce the first item.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem, and congratulations on your daughter's graduation. Well, we've got 3 items today that are very related. Every single one of these items is really not just focused on Charlotte, but Charlotte is very crucial or critical to all of them. But they're more of regional in focus. We'll start with our Silver Line transit-oriented development project that we've been working on alongside the Silver Line alignment itself for the last several months. So we have John Howard from Charlotte Area Transit System and Monica Holmes, who will be presenting that to us. We also have, as you had during the introduction, John Lewis, the Executive Director of CATS. So we've got all the right people in the room to be able to discuss this morning. So I'll turn it over to John and Monica, and then I think John starts first, and then Monica. Thank you.
Thank you,
Taiwo. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes. John, this is John Lewis. I'm going to go ahead and give the introduction, then I'll turn over to you. Way too many Johns in the room. But with that, I wanted to remind committee members a lot of time and effort over the last 18 months has been focused, rightly so, on our design efforts for the Silver Line. We have gone through the preliminary planning and design to develop the alignment for the Silver Line light rail project. And as we continue to work towards design, this is a critical juncture in the overall project. One of the key takeaways from our Blue Line investment, both in the South Corridor and the recently opened Blue Line extension that opened in 2018, was while those projects overperformed from a mobility standpoint, there were some clear lessons learned in terms of our ability to leverage that investment in transportation infrastructure to meet other goals of the city and of the region, housing, economic development, et cetera. So we wanted to be very intentional as we began this study for the next corridor for the Silver Line to not just look at it from a mobility standpoint, but really to also spend a lot of time at the outset rather than at the end looking at station areas, how this investment can facilitate and kickstart growth along that corridor, and how can we do our best to direct the kind of growth that meets and enhances other city policies. And so with that, we took a different path in this study. While we're going through with the engineering portion of it, we're also taking a very intentional look at transit-oriented development. And John Howard and Monica have been leading this effort. This is an interdepartmental effort, both from CATS and from city planning, to really bring the right people around the table so that we can make sure that we are going to be able to reach the right investments in this project, not only from a mobility standpoint, but from other aspects that are important to our community. And so I wanted to make sure that committee members understood this is not the design phase of the project. That is a separate project. This is a parallel study that is focused on transit-oriented developments along the corridor and at the stations. So with that, I'll turn it over to John Howard, who is leading the effort for CATS. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis, for that great introduction. Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and members of City Council and staff. I was before you, I think in October of last year, to talk about the TOD study and just to give you an introduction of what that entailed. So now we will talk more about the next steps since the refined LPA was adopted in April of this year. So let's go to the next slide, next couple of slides to the scope. And next one. There we go. And as Mr. Lewis alluded to, we did a lot of work with the Silver Line design team in getting to that refined LPA process. And part of the work that we were doing on the TOD side was helping with the decision making in terms of what kind of TOD metrics, if you will, could be also informational for that decision making process. Again, not just for getting a line from point A to point B, but also looking at where that development potential would actually be really meaningful. And it helped us in two different ways. One, it helped us kind of, I guess, decide like what could be some real creative and interesting ways to look at the alignment from a different perspective, and also confirming some decisions that were made back in 2016. So as far as the alignment itself. So I'll get more into that in a little bit. But to this point, we are looking at, again, we did finalize the refined LPA in April. We're still going to be working with the design team, though, throughout the summer. And Monica will talk more about that here pretty soon as far as the engagement process and looking at others potential station changes that could be taking place. But we have a very robust public outreach effort coming up in June and July and August. We did do an existing conditions report in our TOD readiness in the market study analysis piece. So we have that information as well. And also we're looking at affordable housing opportunities along the alignment. Again, we did not do this kind of work for Blue Line or BLE this early. So one of the unique things about this study is we're doing this very proactively, well in advance of construction of the Silver Line. So again, looking at affordable housing opportunities and mixed income housing opportunities, and also guidance for our station area planning efforts around the stations of 29 miles of the light rail line, and also implementation in terms of infrastructure, just like we have with CNEP and NECE for the Blue Line extension. What are those critical connections to and from the station areas where we need to build the streets and build connections to existing transit that we have online, working with our other partners with the county to make sure that we really have a robust and connected infrastructure for the light rail system and the station area planning effort. Next slide, please. So like I said before, the big deliverable is, of course, the station area plan. We'll have station area planning efforts going on this summer. Each station will have its own area planning document, if you will, all in one document. But we also have 7 different station areas. We have 1 in the city of Belmont, 4 in Charlotte, and 2 in Matthews. And what that is more of a deeper dive, if you will, in terms of looking at the critical, again, the market analysis, the housing analysis, the infrastructure needs, those critical connections. So one of those stations will be 11th Street in Uptown, Wilson Boulevard, the Bojangles area, of the auditorium area, and also the Village Lake area on the east side. So those are the 4 station areas that are in the pipeline for us to do a really focused study on. And again, one in the city of Belmont and 2 in Matthews. We just wrapped up a white paper for the towns. We did do in-person interviews, or sorry, virtual interviews with the towns outside of Charlotte to talk about their zoning tool that they have on the ground now and how they could actually be improved or updated to get ready for TOD in their jurisdiction. So that work was wrapped up a few months ago. And we'll also have a stationary topology manual that will go along with that, and also looking at different station location alternatives, as I said before. Next slide, please. So again, something different for this planning effort. We didn't really include the county before in terms of looking at parks and open spaces. That's also very important for the area planning effort. It's not just about development and building everything new, but it's also about public space and, again, access to a public area. So that's something that we're looking at in this deliverable. Next slide, please. And we did do a very high-level market assessment in the first run, and we'll continue to do that in the next coming months as we begin to refine the station areas and look at those 7 demonstration areas. We'll have a deeper dive into the market capability of those stations. Thanks. And again, housing is a major issue, of course, citywide and regionally as well, not just in the city of Charlotte. So we've been having those conversations with our partners and the other towns and jurisdictions to talk about how we do it here in Charlotte, but also how can they get ready for affordable housing in their jurisdiction. So one thing we're going to look at is where can we leverage either partnerships or public land or some kind of joint development opportunities that we can leverage that affordable housing piece. We can definitely make sure we get that within the half-mile walk radius of a station. And this will all help inform other plans. There's a lot of planning efforts going on in the city and regionally. You're going to hear from Connect Beyond in a little bit, but also, of course, the 2040 Vision Plan for Center City and for the Mecklenburg County. So we're going to leverage all those partnerships to make sure that we're connecting all the right people, all the right opportunities for leveraging those partnerships to make sure that we're inclusive and that we don't leave anybody out. We talk a lot about equity. We talk a lot about housing. We just want to make sure that we touch everybody that we can during this planning effort. It's a major project that's going to last for generations, so we want to make sure that we get it right. Next slide, please. And now I'll turn it over to Monica, who will talk through some of our education and outreach strategies for the summer.
Madam Chair, could I ask a question?
Sure. Yes.
So when we look at this housing, we have a basic problem that the creation of this kind of rail transit, as we've seen on the Blue Line, immediately causes the value of property along that line to go up. And that's a large-scale thing. It's not something that is easy for us with the resources we have to work against. So do we really have kind of adequate planning to make sure that our vision of allowing people of limited means to benefit from this kind of transit is going to work? I mean, if you look at the Blue Line, it feels like everything that's going up along there is high cost.
Thank you, Councilman Jarrett, for that. And I will back up on one point. So on Blue Line, you're right. We did not adequately plan for affordability in terms of a housing strategy for that. We are getting some units online now that are near or around the stations, but we didn't plan for that previously. The same for BLE. We're getting some affordable housing units coming online as we speak. But again, in this effort, we're doing more to kind of think about that ahead of time and looking at what kind of land allocation can we actually get to have control. Like around our stations, we're going to have space for construction, space for lay down for your for your activities, for construction activities. So I think that's where we're going to have an advantage in this go around. Again, lessons learned from Blue Line, lessons learned from BLE. If we can leverage those spaces that we use to, one, construct the areas around the station, and also leverage any kind of other public lands that we have, whether it's schools or county or what have you, and just look at that early on and identify those places and reserve them if we can for housing or for other types of development that benefits not just the high market marketplace, but also the affordable housing marketplace.
What I'm trying to emphasize, though, is in number terms, this is a really big problem. If you take what that land is worth in those locations in the market and the kind of uses that we would like to see there, that differential is very big. So I don't think we can just pay lip service to this issue. I'm concerned with what options we really have in order to prevent market forces from putting those properties out of reach. The other question I had is the development along this corridor is going to represent a huge windfall for people who own land along there. Do we have any means through a TIF or something like that to recapture some of the value that's being created for others by virtue of what we're doing?
Well, I think that's part of what we're going to do in our analysis of strategies for that kind of leverage. In some cities, they have special tax districts, if you will, around stations. I think in Austin they have that. That could be something in our toolbox that we'll look at. But again, I think we're looking for good ideas of how to make that a reality here in Charlotte, something different out of the box thinking. But you're right. Whenever you have rail transit, land values and land speculation does increase. That's without a doubt. And we're also working with the city's anti-displacement team to look at this issue as well. So we're all kind of talking about the same issue all as one group.
Councilman Driggs, this is John Lewis.
Yeah.
If I could add to John Howard's answer to that, two things. Number one, your question regarding the value of the land. Part of the lessons learned from the Blue Line extension and what the Metropolitan Transit Commission has enabled CATS to do is also to set aside some funding for advanced purchase of right-of-way. And so there is a revolving pot of funds that we have utilized to acquire property thus far. And we will continue to leverage that as the work of the TOD plan continues to identify key areas that we may need to advance purchase, also identifying opportunities to leverage other funding sources to help us control that. I don't know that we can completely eliminate that issue, but I think we can make some targeted investments that will help us manage that issue moving forward. Second,
so if you're making those investments, that means that the alignment is finalized. So are we no longer talking about the most preferred or any kind of, do we know exactly what the alignment is going to be at this point?
So we have an alignment that was authorized at the April MTC meeting. Has this alignment been finalized? No, we're early enough in the design process that if our continued work finds a fatal flaw in a particular area or station, we can adjust that. But in terms of the macro side of the alignment has been developed.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Mr. Newton, I'm going to recognize you in just a second, but I want to follow, if that's okay, on a question Mr. Driggs asked. That was my question as well, John. I guess all along I thought that we would hear from you all about the alignment, the proposed alignment after all of that community engagement. But what I'm kind of hearing is that council really doesn't have a role in that alignment choice, that MTC ultimately does. And so I'm a little bit confused by that. We have brought up in the past a request that the public has made, and that I certainly, as a committee member, support that the ULI, there be an independent study, land use study, to determine the best alignment from a development standpoint, or a peer analysis by the APTA to determine, again, that this is going to be the best development route. And it feels like that's just not even an option anymore, because
well, I understand, and I think we have to understand where we are in the process. Having a ULI, that has always been a part of the overall design phase, but you really have to start from a starting place. And so having an alignment that the MTC, as the regional transit body, has developed, as I mentioned earlier, it is by no means finalized, but we have to have a starting place. And in that, we have identified where these stations are, and we're beginning that next level of investigation, into that corridor. If we find that there are fatal flaws or better options along that corridor, this is the time where we deal with those kind of questions. Within this TOD study and the next phase of alignments, there are opportunities, and it has been planned into the scope of this, interactions with ULI to come in and look at our station areas that has been developed and alluded to, and get their input on the alignment as it currently is constituted. And we'll take that input and continue to move forward with that. The APTA peer review, as we did with the Blue Line extension and the South Corridor, typically happens around 30% when we have enough information that we can really get defined ridership study. You can't do ridership until you know where the stations are. And so this is a chicken and an egg kind of thing. Right now, we're focused on where the stations will be and how we can leverage that. Get input from the economic development community now that we have kind of made broad circles along the corridor. We will take that input and continue to refine the plan as once we come out with a kind of more refined station area and alignment, then we can start getting into the details of questions on ridership and others that would happen through a peer review.
Can I chime in a little bit on the developer, the ULI specific component? So there's such a large team working on this that it is a little bit of a misunderstanding that we haven't been evaluating all of those things along the way. So there were some maps that you could see. Basically, all of the alignment that was at MTC on April 29th folded in lots of changes that came from developer interviews, market readiness, and informed those changes. So, for example, moving from the median of Wilkinson to the Norfolk Southern alignment was both an engineering decision, but also a market readiness decision, because we heard from the development community that that was a much stronger alignment. Same thing for there are other sections where you could kind of go into all the details. So I will just say that our TOD consulting team has been kind of that gut check on the design team all along the way in partnership, because they don't actually, one doesn't work for the other. So in some ways that's been a complementary relationship, in that they've been questioning the design team a lot about those decisions along the way. And so I think we could go into all the details of how those have played out. I would be interested, we've been working with ULI on these seminars, and I would be interested, obviously as we go into the station area planning, we'll be meeting with developers and property owners in each station area, and we can go into those further details. But I do want to acknowledge that we have spent the past year really vetting the current alignment with experts in affordable housing, experts in the real estate market, economic development, with some of the best in the country. So I just don't want to discredit that work, because I think that work has been really influential to where we are today.
Okay, I guess this is just sort of revelationary to me because it feels like we as a committee or council actually don't have much say in this. I still am on record that I'm uncomfortable with the 11th Street and the airport alignment. I still don't understand it. I thought there was an input point, but it doesn't appear that there really is from a council, that this is really an MTC process. So I don't know what else to say about that, but I'll let Mr. Newton go ahead and ask his question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start by saying that I'm confused as well. I was under the impression that the alignment would come in front of the council for an approval. Certainly that the MTC would weigh in, but that we would have that chance to weigh in on the overall alignment as well, not just the stations. I know that residents in the Woodbury neighborhood still have a lot of what I would consider to be legitimate concerns regarding disruption and encroachment into their neighborhood with the current alignment. And I don't think that those have been addressed. I even had a resident reach out to me last week asking me if any information or additional information was available for the neighborhood. So that makes me uncomfortable in this process moving forward. And I wanted to mention that. I wanted to ask, so my question revolves around or is concerning the express lanes on Independence and how they've split I guess the Near East or maybe the Middle East, and how it's really created a challenge for pedestrian connectivity, so much so that we have had people struck and killed trying to cross Independence. I'm assuming when we talk about kind of this radius, this area that will source the stations, I'm assuming that radius is going to extend over to the opposite side of Independence, and I'm wondering what thought has gone into creating pedestrian connectivity across Independence at these stations.
I guess I'll take that, John, if you want me to.
No, go ahead.
The infrastructure, if you'll remember, the infrastructure investments are part of the station area planning that we'll be doing over the summer. So when we get to the timeline here, all of those pedestrian connectivity, we're working closely with CDOT, and their team is part of our interdepartmental team, and we will be looking for those opportunities. Access from either side of Independence is critical to the success of the Silver Line, and so we want to identify those as early as possible. So in the station area planning work, it's not just about land use. It really is about infrastructure and pedestrian and bike connectivity to the station to create a network. So we'll show it in a minute, but over June, July, August, we'll be getting the public feedback and input on what the most critical of those are, and working with our partners in transportation to help identify those, which would then go into an infrastructure package that would happen with the Silver Line, when it moves into construction.
Thank you for that. Given the extent and the scope of this project, I don't want us to miss the golden opportunity to make up ground where maybe we've lost it with these express lanes, from the standpoint, of course, of that pedestrian connectivity and public safety, frankly. So thank you, and I just want to make sure that we continue to have a focus and emphasis on that and not lose sight of it.
Thank you, Mr. Newton. Mr. Winston?
I just want to state for the record that the way our governance structure works with MTC, CATS, and city decisions, this has always been the case about how decisions get made. I would also just like to state for the record that council has had opportunities to weigh in about this alignment process. I think it was a couple months ago. Staff came to us about this specifically, and we were, as council members, able to give guidance that was shared with the MTC process. I remember one conversation specifically about making sure that the alignment along 11th is not tied to 277 and being able to separate those should future development do something like remove 277. Not only were those inputs from the council given to the MTC process, but our staff also followed up with all of that those questions and comments from council. They responded back to us in written documents. So I would urge council members to go back into their emails and brush up on those notes that we gave to the process about the alignment and the responses that we were given back from staff. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised. So go ahead, John. I don't know if you...
At this point, yeah, I'll turn it over to Monica, and she'll do the second half to talk about the outreach plan for the year.
Okay.
So like John just mentioned, I'll be talking through kind of what our schedule is moving forward for this TOD station area planning work. So as we mentioned, we're in the transition now from really designing the line to focusing on what's happening at each station area. And so we're obviously trying to leverage all of the existing channels and all of the plan work, as John Howard was just mentioning. And really this is a collaborative effort between the city of Charlotte, Matthews, Belmont, and also CATS as the glue and the face of the project. So we're working all together, having this unique experience of connecting all of the different projects together and then pulling out the specific scope for our work. So I'm going to show this once and then I'll show it again a little bit later so you can dive down into it. But where we are, as you can see, the final alignment has been adopted like April 29th, as we were mentioning, and we're now moving and pivoting to the station area planning and public engagement and education on transit-oriented development. We've heard a lot about all of these issues because it's what people are really passionate about, and it's finally time for everyone to get really involved into the conversation around these specific topics. So we'll be working over the summer for all of the engagement piece, and we'll be doing the implementation and strategy development in the fall with the final station area plans at the end of December by the end of the year. And as a reminder, this is all coming from $1 million grant that we were almost $1 million grant that we received from the FTA a couple of years ago to do this work. So we're leveraging all those resources with a good deadline of the end of 2021. So zooming in on now to the end of the summer, we had a great webinar just a couple of days ago on the TOD basics. We partnered with ULI to do that. We had over 130 people on the line live, but that also was recorded, so we're going to be putting it on our website. We'll show you the flyers in just a minute, but later this week on Thursday, we have an ETOD, which stands for Equitable Transit-Oriented Development webinar as well. That will be on Thursday, and Taiwo will be moderating that panel. Really exciting speakers on that I'll talk about in a second. We have our consultant team in town to do stakeholder meetings with economic development, transportation, all of the towns, large property owners. Those will be happening that third week of June, and we'll also be having a large kickoff meeting on June 22nd that'll be corridor-wide. And then we have 2 weeks of station area planning workshops from July 12th through the 22nd, which will be a hybrid of outdoor, in-person, as well as online. And our team, which is a fairly large consultant team, will be working with staff out of the Charlotte Urban Design Center, kind of doing real-time design work. We will come back later this summer and kind of go back to those results and get the last bit of engagement. We're still finalizing the dates as to which we'll be doing that. Throughout this project, we'll be running the transit-oriented development website and our survey, which will go live. Our target is mid-June, and I'll be showing that website as well. So here you can see the two education webinars, one which we just finished last Thursday. Maybe some of you all were able to make it. That was really focused on a baseline 101, what is TOD and how does that work in both small and big cities. So we had people from Austin, Texas on the panel, Denver, Phoenix, and then a local developer. Really exciting stuff, seeing what are they doing in other places and how can we do it even better. This week, we'll be really focusing some of those questions that Councilmember Driggs asked about displacement and what are some strategies we can look at for affordable housing. I can tell you that John and I have set in on interviews with each of the panelists that'll be on the panel for Thursday, and they're just doing some really exciting things. Two are from Seattle, one is from Atlanta, and then one is from right here in our backyard, really focusing on NOAA units. So that will be this Thursday, really interesting, and I think provides a lot of lessons learned and tools in the toolbox that other cities have that I think we could potentially incorporate here in Charlotte. That all predates the station area planning workshops, which again will happen in those 2 weeks of July. We'll make sure you guys are more than welcome to drop into the studio and see it in real time. We'll make sure you guys have those dates. Those will happen from July 12th through the 22nd. And then we'll have the evening workshops. I'll go through those dates. We will move from west to east through the corridor over those 2 weeks, having the evening in-person outdoor event paired with the virtual website information. And you can see here the ones highlighted in yellow are the ones that will be in the city of Charlotte. So we're finalizing locations that are very proximate to where we will be studying. So we'll start with Remount, then look at Uptown, then the Bojangles area, and then Monroe Road, Village Lake area. So I will say that our focus areas were chosen because they represent unique station types, and they are all different in their kind of needs and their assessment. So we are using them as basically prototypes. So for example, like in the Remount location, it's close to a lot of single family neighborhoods. There's a lot of pressure for displacement. There's also a lot of development pressure. That's a good typology to look at there. Uptown is obviously 11th Street and Uptown. Bojangles, that's a huge development opportunity, not even just at the arena site, but also the park next door. And then Monroe Road and Village Lake, there's a large number of affordable housing units currently, and we really want to look at and study how does that redevelop over time while preserving those units and the people who need transit and access to them. So we'll be launching the website in mid-June. We'll have the YouTube Zoom event on June 22nd that will be corridor-wide. We will be using the catsilverline.com website. If you go to it right now, it's not live. We're finalizing it and tweaking it for that launch date. And we'll have an online map-based survey that will launch with the website where people can give us all of that good feedback and information like the infrastructure improvements and investments that they want to see, specific information about land uses, what types of things, how do you want to access the station, and all of those different things that are really important to people who live near the Silver Line. So again, I'll just finish with this is our timeline over the summer. If you guys have any questions about it, I'd be more than happy to answer them, and we can also follow up if need be.
Thank you, Monica. I don't know if we have any hands raised in the room, if Mr. Eggleston or Mr. Winston have any questions.
No.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, and I don't see any online either, so I appreciate that. The next item then is Beyond 77, and we have Bob Cook from Planning, Design, and Development and Augustine Rodriguez as well. And I will turn it over to you all, unless, Taiwo, if you have an introduction first.
No, just turn it over to Bob Cook. Thank you.
This is Bob Cook with CRGPO and Planning, and thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Taiwo. I just wanted to provide a brief introduction to this and then turn it over to Augustine Rodriguez and Adam Howell from Atkins, the project manager on our consultant team. Do we have some slides to show for this? Is it showing? Oh, no. Okay, because, yeah. Can we get to the... I don't know if it was showing up on that smaller screen.
Beyond 77 slides, you have the Connect Beyond slides on. Two different ones.
You guys confused this.
The other slideshow.
Just for the record, we had Beyond first. Just very good. I knew I shouldn't have opened up that.
I think the tourist study would be beyond Beyonce.
So maybe while we're waiting, we can just give a snapshot of.
I can do that.
Yeah, if you can.
Based upon the overview, and hopefully folks have a copy of the presentation in front of them in one form or another. But Beyond 77 is a study of the I-77 corridor that begins north of Statesville at the interchange of I-77 and I-40 and extends 68 miles south to Rock Hill at approximately exit 77 rather. So it's 68 miles, and then we have a buffer that's involved here. It's not an analysis of that ribbon of asphalt that's I-77 for those 68 miles. It's really taking a look at a corridor. So that buffer is about 6 miles from east to west on either side, give or take, depending upon the situations involved with land use, et cetera. Then there's about 1 million residents within the corridor and 21 agencies or jurisdictions that we're working with for the study. And really, the premise behind it is to provide all the jurisdictions, the MPOs in the planning area, and there are two. There's one in South Carolina in addition to CRTPO, and all the municipalities and the counties with a toolbox of different techniques that can be used to improve mobility in and through the corridor. So to give you an example where you do have the interchanges and the intersecting streets, they have a profound impact on the interstate. Let's talk about mobility in those areas for people who need to get from one side of the interstate to the other, but have no interest in getting on the interstate. The mobility is often compromised in those areas. So let's see what we can do to improve that situation. So that's really the basic premise of the Beyond 77 study. And with that, I'm going to turn it over, as I said, to Augustine and Adam. And I do want to, by the way, thank both of them for just a tremendous effort on this project. It's one of the things that we have found is that really nobody else has done anything quite like this in the country. So they're really breaking new ground. And I think they've done a tremendous job, and I think you'll see that early on in the presentation with the results of public engagement that they've achieved, I should say. It's been phenomenal, particularly in light of the conditions under which we're operating. So I want to thank both of them for the hard work on this. So, Augustine, it's all yours.
Thank you, Bob, and good afternoon, everyone. Mayor Pro Tem, council members, and guests. Thank you, Bob, again. Beyond 77, we started, actually, let me go back to one thing before I mention when we started. I believe that I presented an initial update highlights back in November of 2019. At that point, we just had begun the study a month before that, or 2 months before that, which was the phase one. So between September of last year through December, we were putting together a plan to execute the first phase. So January of 2020, we began the first phase, which was the data collection. We got two aspects of that. The one with the public, where we conducted a survey, an online survey. We conducted a couple of meetings, stakeholder meetings. We were trying to collect information on their travel experience to tell us about what they see as the problems on 77 in the corridor as a whole. Likewise, on the consultant side, the consultant team and the project team, we were collecting and evaluating plans ranging from transportation plans, comprehensive plans, regional, local level, economic plans, everything within the corridor and surrounding areas. By doing that, we were able to collect roughly 400 different plan sets for this 68 miles stretch. Then in the summer, we moved to phase two, where we took that data and started evaluating. We started doing the analysis of that. And we also conducted a survey, an online survey. This was, I believe, in August. Yeah, as you can see on the screen, August through September of last year. And immediately after that, we're starting to really look at what are the underlying problems. We all know the congestion obviously is a problem on, well, pretty much everywhere in the world, that you have a lot of cars, urban areas and whatnot, but really what are the underlying problems? And by doing that, we start looking at many underlying problems in basic policies and basic programs that were missing, or they were really connecting with one another. By doing that, we also asked the public, and they told us the number one reason for they to see the problem in traffic congestion was the disconnect between land coordination planning and transportation planning. So we were pretty impressed to see that the public, as you can see, I think in one of the next slides, over 8,000 people respond or give us that as the number one answer when we asked that question. And then, since January of this year, we have been working on the solutions. So we took that data, we evaluated, we found the data, then we evaluated the analysis, and then now we're starting to look at the solutions. How can we possibly start addressing these problems? And we were asked or challenged to not hold back and look at everything. So put all the cards on the table. By doing that, we initially started with 250 individual line items of possible, let's call it just ideas. We come out with 250 ideas initially. And then on a process of 8 weeks with the CRTPS staff, City of Charlotte, and a lot of the stakeholders involved in the study, we started to look at many of them. Some of them got combined, some of them got removed or put on hold. And eventually finalized it with 176. So that's the number of ideas that we have on the table right now, 176. They are all grouped in different categories and areas, and Adam will talk more about that in a moment. But that's really where we are right now. Where we're going next is to take that information and the feedback that we got from the public during April 1st to May 15th, over a 6-week period, where we got close to 6,000 online surveys responses and more than 400 comments on the strategies and solutions. Next, please. I want to highlight really quickly about the public relations, the public engagement process that for Beyond 77 has been an extreme success. I cannot emphasize that. Our consultant for this piece of the study is Boston in Florida. The station or the headquarters is in Florida. And even for them, for the advertising publicity company, they said this is a record for them. We really have gone above and beyond trying to get feedback from the community. And one of the ways was reaching out to media outlets and conducted presentations, a virtual conference with the media, as well as interviews. We have been featured on TV, on Telemundo, on Channel 3, on a podcast here in Charlotte. So that has been a tremendous success. As you can see the number over there, 37 million impressions. So that's individual clicks on our website, 37 million clicks. Next, please. Here are a few more details as far as the process for our engagement process. Over, as I say a moment ago, over 25,000 surveys completed. Going all the way down, I'm not going to run through all those numbers. Number of comments, 400, or participants, I should say 431 participants. Most of that obviously has been virtual events. We were only able to conduct 3 in-person meetings before we got hit with COVID-19, the entire planet. Next, please. At this point, I'm going to turn over to Adam Howell, where he's going to walk us through what I briefly told you about the process for the solutions and the 176 ideas that we're evaluating as of now. Adam?
Thank you, Augustine, and good afternoon. I want to make sure, can somebody acknowledge you can hear me well today? Excellent. Thank you so much. So, Mayor Pro Tem and members of the committee and staff, thank you again for the opportunity to present. And Ms. Isold, I saw that audible wow that you said earlier, so that's the factor we're going for. So we worked very closely with our CRTPO partners to define a foundation for developing strategy solutions, which is shown here as a simple image as a life cycle for planning implementation for transportation, but can be applied for any level of transportation or planning aspect. In the center are the three key areas that inform each other. Policymaking first informs programming and operational functions, which then leads to project implementations for shovel-ready projects on the ground. Funding concepts are important as money is, of course, necessary to support any aspect of those three key areas in the center. And then emerging technologies that support any aspect of transportation or any function of those three in the middle, or even funding, can be enhanced and applied to allow more efficient use and function. All proposed strategies and solutions fall under these categories and will help to inform each other as they will eventually translate into an implementation plan for later this year. Next slide, please. So what you see here on the screen is our decision-making structure. The bubble in the middle, the ideal solution, is whatever that ideal solution is in your brain that helps to improve transportation for anybody around the entire region, whether it is walking down a sidewalk or taking the Silver Line in the future to getting from the southeast part of the region to the town of Belmont. And so I wanted to make that point clear that it is a scalable ideal solution supported by 6 key decision factors that stemmed from all the engagement factors and opportunities that Augustine reviewed earlier. We reviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of policy statements and goals from jurisdictions. We reviewed hundreds and thousands of comments and data points from the public and started to boil down the major common themes that started to come from those options. And those 6 things were safety, which of course is paramount to all we do in transportation planning and development. Mode choice, working to provide as many options and choice for users to move about the region. Land use alignment, we are exploring this to develop strategies and solutions that incorporate smart growth principles with respect to transportation, as well as economic development features on a regional scale. Travel performance is standard for what we do to evaluate how we implement transportation projects now and in the future, but also helping us move as efficiently as possible throughout the region. Equity, we are wanting to focus generally on what a perceived or what a strategy or solution would do to perceived transportation costs per household, as well as generalized socioeconomic impacts of transportation and development. And the last one is regional scalability. And I understand that there are nothing else stemming from that bubble, but it is really just to define the regional impact that could be provided by a strategy and or solution. And that would be just through one jurisdiction, 2 jurisdictions, or even 3 or more, because then you have that full regional scale. Next slide, please. And so before I read to you what's on the screen, as Augustine said, we have 176 strategies and solutions, and my team has already received well over 100 comments through our phase 3 engagement. And we're excited to continue to work through them and refine them to make sure the plan works for CRTPO and all of its planning partners to help move forward into the future. So I'm not going to review all 176 of them with you today, but I'm going to review 5 of them, several of them which have the opportunity to potentially help you all as decision makers make more informed decisions now and in the future. So the first one we're going to review is one coming from the policymaking strategy, and that is the suggestion or recommendation to have a policy that would define what equitable mobility means. So stemming from our initiative of Beyond 77, leadership from all local and regional planning organizations could and or should work with their boards and other elected officials such as yourself and their constituents to determine an effective policy or set of policies that could incorporate aspects of equity in all planning practices, whether that's transportation-based or beyond. This would help to ensure that all plant infrastructure and service programs help to offer the same opportunity and outcome to all users. And I do want to also say this is reliant upon another recommendation that's a part of the list when it comes to travel demand modeling and what informs the decisions that you help to make that there could be equitable factors incorporated into that. Next slide. The next one is from the key area of programming. And this has become an important and critical topic, of course, as we all explore infrastructure investments in the near and the long-term futures. And it's suggesting that through a public-public set of partnerships, that there should be a regional strategy for funding alternatives. So suggesting that regional and local partners responsible for planning for and implementing infrastructure programs and projects should develop a short and long-term strategy for adopting new funding alternatives. The goal here would be to develop a common vision and strategy that diversifies your funding sources for critical needs, as well as reduces the reliance on state and federal programs. Through a regional unified strategy on which the public would have a more direct say, they can have greater ownership on local, regional infrastructure systems for the future. And I do also want to say here that we have been coordinating and will continue to do so with other initiatives that are active as we speak on what this looks like between different planning initiatives so that the language and what is put forward is in concurrence with each other. Next slide, please. Now I want to walk you through just a couple of examples of projects on the ground. This one is taken straight from the Connect Beyond initiative, and my team supplemented with 1 or 2 extra corridors. This is talking about mobility corridors that could be implemented now or long into the future. But again, based on initial outputs from Connect Beyond, and we will continue to refine this as they work through their final recommendations, regional and local agencies should coordinate to implement critical first mile, last mile, and key local bus services along these suggested mobility corridors. Many of these corridors can benefit from, like I said, increased bus services or improved bike pedestrian access, improvements from long-term future high-capacity transit technologies, or even benefit from subsidized opportunities like what CATS already does with Lyft to access transit stations today. Next slide, please. Another option here, I wanted to certainly bring this one to light because my team really appreciated the work that was done by CDOT staff there within the city of Charlotte. And they created a suite of solutions to be considered that really wasn't a part of any other planned and programmed initiative at this point, but it really helped us as a consultant team capture the essence of what connectivity could and or should look and feel like across and parallel to Interstate 77. So this entire suite of solutions is proposed to enhance connectivity by providing additional multimodal infrastructure. And again, that is applicable to a car or even just you as an individual walking down a sidewalk or greenway. That would be parallel to I-77 between uptown Charlotte and the state line. There are actually 22 individual project concepts captured here, most of which were developed by CDOT staff, and we decided that we wanted to elevate them and make them as a part of a plan, and then my team supplemented with a couple more options. But again, ranging from bike route improvements to numerous street extensions for improved circulation and reducing overall reliance on the interstate facility, which we know is probably one of the most congested sections of the interstate. Next slide, please. And this final one is a unique one, and I'm not suggesting that's going to happen in the near term, but it's the concept of an interstate cap or land bridge solution. It would be, the map you see there suggests 3 locations, and we've already been alerted to another one on the northeast side of the 277 loop between Davidson and Caldwell. But it would allow for greater and safer connectivity across the freeway that exists as a barrier. And it allows new opportunities to emphasize transit and bike pedestrian connections, but also allows equity opportunities to access green space, affordable housing, or even major scale economic redevelopment opportunities on top of that land bridge. It is really up to the community as to what is built and envisioned for that space. But of course, the whole design is to reconnect communities that have historically been impacted by the freeway's existence. Next slide, please. So moving forward from here today, as we stand at 176 options to consider, the final outcomes for Beyond 77 will include clear direction on how strategies and solutions will be implemented, suggested timeframes for when and for implementation and by whom. And as Bob said earlier, these are designed to be one big suite of solutions that can be a toolkit for any jurisdiction or collection of jurisdictions to pick and choose from based on the recommended time frame that is outlined as a part of this plan. Roles and responsibilities of stakeholders as they relate to the plan, strategy, and solution implementation process, depending on how the program unfolds. And as I said, also a toolkit of policies and programmatic options that stem beyond just project infrastructure options to move forward for local communities to consider in local transportation and land use planning initiative connections. Next slide. As a part of Beyond 77, we are also tasked with conducting a funding alternatives development study, or task. We are producing a set of funding alternatives through a regional lens and/or approach, and I want to emphasize that again, through a regional lens and approach. We are identifying and have already identified viable potential funding sources that are actually tried and true, but through that regional context. We're also identifying some other potential funding sources that may not be ready for today or the next 5 years, but is something for the community as the Charlotte metropolitan region to consider as a regional context and explore with a NC legislation and understand and see if that might be viable in the long-term future. We're going to review choices and trade-offs of both the tried and true ones as well as those that may not be quite ready for today, and document what those choices and trade-offs are so that you are understanding from the big picture perspective so you make better informed decisions moving forward. And then we also want to suggest those funding alternatives that I highlighted earlier, longer term exploration implementation, what we feel might be feasible based on the current atmosphere of the situation and the state of things. Next slide, please. Our pathway to final recommendations, we have a lot of work to do. But the goal is to have this wrap up by the end of September. In the month of June, the project team will finalize our recommendations list based on the feedback that we received during phase 3. And again, I would like to thank Mr. Winston for participating in our virtual public meeting back in like not even 2 weeks ago. So thank you, sir, for joining us on that. In July, the project team will finalize implementation framework development. We will work very closely with CRTPO and its committees to make sure that applicable timeframes are assigned to every single recommendation that makes it onto this list. And we're talking 30 plus years here. In August, we will finalize implementation plan report and supporting documents, which also includes the funding alternatives, choices and trade-offs process, and any tools that may supplement the connection between the implementation plan and the funding alternatives discussion. And then finally in September, Augustine, myself, and Bob, and any other partners they deem present will conduct a series of presentations to boards, councils, and commissions for the potential endorsement. Next slide, please. And we have built an on-demand expo, a virtual on-demand expo for this project. It went live for phase 3 back on April 1st, and we have decided to keep it live. It contains general information that I provided to you, as well as full transparency with all the public engagement data. Because of the sheer volume of data that we've received as a part of this process, we felt that a simple report summary just didn't quite do it justice. And so we created these dashboards for you to interact with the data so that you can go ahead and pick your zip codes that you may represent and understand what your constituents might be saying. You can look at it from the aggregate. You can look at it by state, however you want to, and understand travel demand preferences, what people might want to pay. We asked some questions about funding and what they're willing to do, and it has kind of supplemented other efforts that have been going on in parallel with this. Next slide, please. And then finally, I do want to bring your attention to, you may or may not have seen this, we created an existing and future conditions story map. That's a lot of technical language to say that we kind of created a state of the system, nice virtual presentation of information. And what this does is it capitalizes on all the work that the project team did leading up to last fall, where we explored all of your land use choices that you currently have on the table. And we did coordinate with the City Future 2040 plan as it was in draft development at the time. So those policies and goals and objectives are documented as a part of this analysis. And what this does is it's basically informing you of the land planning choices that are currently being made, paired with the congestion issues that we're experiencing and some of the recommendations that stem and how we made our decisions to create our list of current strategies and solutions moving forward. So that's also available as a part of our website and will remain live. Next slide, please. So with that, Augustine, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, Adam. Just want to thank and acknowledge the participation for Mayor Pro Tem Isel and Councilman Eggleston and
Augustine,
Winston.
did you have any final comments on that before I take questions from the committee?
I was saying that I want to thank our committee members for the advisory committee on Beyond 77, Mayor Pro Tem Isel, Councilman Eggleston and Winston. Thank you for all your input and support with this study initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Adam. That was a lot of information and great work, so I appreciate that. I see Mr. Driggs has his hand up and Mr. Winston, so I'll go with Mr. Driggs first and then Mr. Winston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So is this entire project a CARTPO or a Charlotte initiative?
It is CARPO, basically.
Okay.
Sir.
Are you making any assumptions about a possible managed lane or other widening project on I-77 south of Uptown?
Say that one more time.
Are you making any assumptions about a possible managed lane or widening project of some kind on I-77 south of Uptown?
I can take that. Mr. Driggs, the current CRTPO long-range plan, our 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, assumes a widening of I-77 South already and assumes a managed lanes component to that. So this study really isn't discussing that in any way or trying to modify that in any way. It's just assuming that that will remain a component of the plan unchanged by this study.
Right, understood. That this study is based on an assumption about that plan, right?
Yes, it is. That's correct.
Right. So if you had corridor funds that came out of that, would they be included in your ideas for funding?
Corridor funds that came out of the I-77 South project?
Yeah, I mean, there were corridor funds in the I-77 North and in the I-485 projects, the funds that were available as part of the project funding for improvements in the corridors.
Yes, they could be, potentially be used. All the funds that we've gotten so far have been allocated for I-77 North and I-485. But if we were to obtain bonus allocation funds, is the term that's used for I-77 South, then those funds could be used in the corridor for, say, some improvements to the intersecting street network, for example.
So I'm just curious to see if CARTPO can actually step up and perform the function of coordinating. I mean, we did not see, for example, in our mobility plan that the funding that was being considered by that had been kind of seriously addressed by CARTPO. And so I'm wondering whether we're going to get back from the CARTPO process some real engagement on the part of the other CARTPO members. Because it seems to me that when it came down to being asked to pay for things, they suddenly got a lot less interested. So I hope CARTPO can be a vehicle to inspire genuine partnership, which does mean a willingness on the part of others to step up. I had one final quick question, and that is, there was a project using I-485 kind of bonus funds, corridor funds, on 521. It appears to have been dropped. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I don't have all the details in front of me, but evidently what that project would have done it would have been implemented and then been basically ripped up in a relatively short period of time for a more long-term project. So instead of having a project implemented and then just having to be redone in a short period of time, NCDOT decided to forego the US 521 funds that were allocated through the bonus allocation process.
So do you know what the timeline is for that other project that's expected to supersede it?
No, sir, I'm sorry, I don't, but I can find that information and get that to you. just later on this afternoon.
And no use has been identified for the 4 or 5 million that was freed up by virtue of taking that project off. Is that right?
I don't believe so. No, not yet. But I'll confirm
All right,
that.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Mr. Winston?
Thank you. I was just going to make a brief comment to, again, encourage my colleagues to plug into this Beyond 77 process and information that is out there. I think it's an excellent opportunity to learn about other projects, other problems, other solutions that are being done or dealt with, both north and south of us. For instance, in that public meeting last 2 weeks ago, I was able to, get to know the Mayor Pro Tem of Statesville a little bit and to learn about some of the things that they're doing and how our more regional approach from a Charlotte perspective could potentially intersect with what is happening in the region. So as we are having these conversations with our constituents about all these plans and these planning processes and how we will deal with issues that will arise. Sometimes, those answers or the ability to facilitate those conversations are housed in these kind of parallel planning processes that are going on. And sometimes, for instance, Mr. Lewis or Mr. Jaoba might not have those answers in the context of their planning processes that are going on. So again, I would just encourage us to do that. For instance, even if we're not necessarily right next to 77. I know Councilmember Newton talks a lot about the potential for a future east-west cross Charlotte trail. Well, at some point in time, if that comes into existence, it will have to cross over, under, or around 77 at some point in time. So understanding what's going on in this process could be very important for the folks in District 5, for instance, to be smart about so some of those bigger picture things and that are going to deal with development and growth can be considered. So, kudos to everybody that's been engaged and involved in this. And again, once again, colleagues, this is a very important and informational resource that we can plug into and better educate our constituents about how we're going to deal with these future growth issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. And for anyone who is interested in plugging in, I certainly recommend attending some of our CARPO meetings where a lot of this gets discussed in great detail. So Mr. Eggleston is the backup and has been to that meeting in my place in the past, and I believe a lot of those are recorded, and you can go back and watch some of those and look at the agendas and see. So a lot of very detailed work that goes on there. So thank you. I don't see any other hands up unless Mr. Eggleston is I don't think your hand is up. So I think that's it for the committee. Thank you all for that presentation. And with that, we're going to move on to the Connect Beyond presentation with Michelle Nance and Jason Lawrence.
So Mayor Pro Tem, we're going to have John Lewis who will speak at the beginning of this. But we also have the Executive Director for Centralina Regional Council online, Ms. Geraldine Gardner, and then she will also speak before we hand off to Michelle and Jason. Thank you.
Thank you, Taiwo. And good afternoon once again, Mayor Pro Tem and committee members. It's a pleasure to be before you to talk about another Beyond project. I think we ought to call this Beyond Squared. But what I think hopefully you've heard throughout the presentations today is that we are thinking beyond just our normal, typical boundaries. The Connect Beyond conversation really began as we were continuing at CATS to update, revitalize, and revision the CATS 2030 plan of how we were going to deliver high-capacity rail corridors to our communities. As we began to look into these discussions, we started hearing more conversations and more interest from our regional partners. through the Silver Line, we have heard very clearly from our partners in the West at Belmont of their interest in being a part of future plans. And again, to our partners in Union County about their interest as a result of our initial planning to be included in the discussions. Now, that was spurred by a particular investment in this Silver Line. But as we look to meet the transportation needs of our community in the broader perspective, a lot of times those conversations have to go beyond the political jurisdictional boundaries. And so working with Centraliner Regional Transportation Council, we have looked beyond just those typical planning boundaries and started asking at a regional level of how can we create a more connected transportation network that meets the very diverse needs of our growing community. And through the work through Connect Beyond, I think we are beginning to answer those questions, and I'm excited about the opportunity to present the findings thus far after almost 2 years of very hard work and very good conversations throughout the entire region. So with that, I'll turn it over to my counterpart, Geraldine, and she will continue with the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be with all of you and the committee members, Mayor Pro Tem Islett. It's a really exciting day when the head of a regional organization gets to spend a couple of hours with a city council committee that talks a lot about regionalism and the importance of connecting the dots between all of our communities and thinking about how we grow together as a region and remain competitive. So thank you for the spirited conversation and all the great presentations this afternoon that are really looking at different layers of mobility across our region. How we talk about regionalism and the region within the Connect Beyond context is a little bit bigger, broader than the other projects you've heard about so far today. The Connect Beyond region is by state. It's 12 counties. It includes multiple transportation planning organizations, 17 different transit agencies, all that have come together in partnership, led by my organization, the Centralina Regional Council, and CATS and the MTC, to think about how can we plan for a vibrant, connected, and inclusive vision for regional mobility that connects our urban, suburban, and rural residents. We believe very strongly that by having this compelling vision for regional mobility, that we can improve quality of life for residents across our region, that we can connect them to education, to healthcare choices, to recreation, and choices to get their daily needs met. But it is also extremely important to our ability to remain economically competitive as a region. We are competing for talent and investment, not just in the Southeast, but across the U.S. and globally. And we know that those employers and those workers coming into our region want to be able to make different choices in how they move about the region. And we know our current residents do as well. So we know this is important. We know a vision is vital, but implementation is even more important. So we look forward to increasing and intensifying our engagement with you and other elected officials across our region, as well as our state and federal partners in the coming weeks and months. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Nance, our Regional Planning Director, to dive into some of the project details. Michelle?
Good afternoon, and thank you, John and Geraldine, for the excellent introduction to the project. We appreciate the opportunity to give you a status update on this transportation project that's responding to the needs that we've heard out in the region. You saw on the slide before that some of our partners, and so Geraldine and John both mentioned that the scope of this project being 12 counties, 2 states, lots of partners have to pull together to really make something like this a reality. I really like this slide here because to me it really demonstrates the importance and long-term impacts of the decisions that we made. This is the bridge opening of the crossing the Catawba River, the World War I Memorial Bridge is just now being scheduled to be refined and replaced. And we've got to do better. This is a once-in-a-century investment. Just like the bridge, we've got to do better in terms of thinking about how we accommodate transportation choices for the almost 1.5 million people that will be here by 2045. Next slide. I'll just say that this plan has a bold vision for the region, and it's building on the great work of CATS, but also extending out, like I said, to 12 counties and 2 states. But one of the most important purposes of this plan is to create a vision for regional transit that we can come together and support, but also helps other counties outside of Mecklenburg start thinking about additional revenue sources that we know are going to be important as we go to implement this plan and all the plans that you've heard about today. So I'm going to let Jason Lawrence actually go through some of the what about our plan, and then we'll wrap up with some next steps. Jason?
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, TAP Committee. It's good to be in front of you all today. And, if you look at the slide in front of you now, it does start with a vision, and in a lot of ways, we've been here before. There was a conversation in the 90s that started about this conversation on growth management, land use policies. That Centers and Corridors discussion led to the development of the 2025 Transit and Land Use Plan that was put in front of Mecklenburg County voters in 1998, which led to the 2030 Transit System Plan, which led to the Blue Line, bus improvements, us discussions about Silver Line. The transit plan has its roots in a regional discussion for Mecklenburg County. And if you go to the next slide, the other regions that we compete with for talent and we're competing for businesses to relocate here, also have these conversations. And where they have a leg up on us is that they have a regional transit system plan. They've had these regional conversations in Austin, in Atlanta, in Denver, in Nashville. And that's what this study will fill that gap, is to put forth a regional transit vision across all the 12 counties in our region. And what is that region on the next slide? As Geraldine and John have stated, Michelle, 12 counties over 2 states. So think of from Shelby to Wadesboro and Anson County, from Statesville into Rock Hill, and all the places in between. During one of our meetings, I heard one of Central Iowa's planners state that this is almost nearly the size of the state of Rhode Island. So a very large geography that we're talking about here for interconnected mobility. And that is in the slide that Michelle stated earlier, close to 4.5 million people over the next 20 years. It's 2.6. So tremendous growth has come in this region yet again. And we kicked off this effort just last year. On the next slide, we had Mayor Lyle speak to us. We had Representative Tolbert talk to us about perspectives from the North Carolina General Assembly. We did this right before the pandemic hit and a lot of the shutdowns occurred, and so we had to pivot multiple times through this effort. We were very fortunate to get this kicked off before so that we could get in front of a large community of people. And if you look on the next slide, we all came together and many of you were in the room and on virtual were at this meeting, and we were excited to begin this plan together. And so on the next slide, what will Connect Beyond do? We want to define a supported transit vision, identify corridors that complement plans and infrastructure, strategize coordination opportunities, and develop implementation tools. And that last part is so important. How will we take this plan to fruition? And we will do that by following 5 guiding principles of creating mobility choice. We know congestion and growth is coming to this region, but how will we create the choices that can be used for residents across our region? How do we prepare for future growth, advancing equity on all levels, and then aligning plans and local visions? And that's a really important piece. This is a regional plan. It's big picture, big ideas, but it must be supported by local plans and visions. And ultimately, how do we plan for implementation? How does this plan go from a shelf product to actually on the streets? And if we zoom in for a moment, we often talk about the big picture ideas. We talk about, high capacity transit corridors, light rail, bus rapid transit. But what does that mean for the rest of the community that may not be along a high capacity transit corridor? And if somebody were in Salisbury today trying to get to a doctor's appointment in Huntersville, and if you look at the map there, you can see that over the cross of that, 4 transit systems, 6 routes, 5 transfers required, close to over 3 hours to make that trip today. And something that would take 40 to 60 minutes in a car each way, and the Uber would be around $75. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that, that return would even take longer to accommodate that trip. So a total round trip time of 8 hours and 19 minutes for a 1-hour appointment. And so I don't know about you, but I don't know how many of us have 8 hours in a day for a 1-hour appointment. And there are people across our region that need access to hospital trips and medical trips across the region, a key piece of our effort that I don't want us to forget when we talk about the high capacity transit, which I think tends to steal the stage. We got to think about all the trips in between that need to occur. And how we get to that is thinking about our mobility in a layer cake, so to say. Like on the top is your high capacity transit, so light rail, bus rapid transit, commuter rail, regional express services, supported by fixed route bus network, paratransit, human services, all that emerging mobility that we hear about today, on demand, the Ubers and the Lyfts. And then ultimately what the foundation is for all of that is transit supportive strategies. How do we have an effective transportation demand management program across this whole region, and also the land use that will support all of that transit. Today I'm going to focus on 2 of those elements. The study will address all of those, but today we're going to just talk a little bit about high capacity transit and emerging mobility corridors. And on the next slide, I know it's maybe hard to see on the map there, but if you think about here in Mecklenburg County, the 2030 transit system plan, the 77 corridor, the Independence and the Wilkinson corridor, and of course the Lynx Blue Line to the south and the northeast. Part of this effort is looking at how to build upon that network at first, 77 all the way into Mooresville and Statesville, looking at 74 all the way into Union and Anson counties, and out Wilkinson to Gaston, into Cleveland County, and into Rock Hill along the 77 corridor. But there's other corridors to think about. What are the next generation of rapid transit corridors here in Charlotte and Mecklenburg County that can build upon the vision of the 2040 plan? So looking at Albemarle and the northwest corridor of Highway 16 will be important mobility corridors for us to think about high capacity transit into the future. And how we make this high capacity transit corridor network successful, and it's hard to see, but the light green on your map there are the mobility corridors where we think that bus network and other types of modes of transit can be used to better make those connections occur. And speaking to bus, I think ultimately how we create a successful transit network within this region, it'll be on bus. No different here in Charlotte, where the bus network carries the majority of our passengers. There's 17 different transit services in our region, and all of them perform human services and paratransit coordination, but there's 6 fixed route providers. So 6 systems within our region provide service along a fixed route, on a predetermined route each and every day. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that there's the network. There's ICAS to the north of Charlotte, Mecklenburg County. You got Ryder Transit in Concord, Kannapolis, Salisbury Transit. You got MyRide in Rock Hill, and Gaston Transit in Gastonia. Now, it may look like we have that network is in place. It certainly is, but the frequency isn't there. How do we make those connections? How do we do the fare in between? How do we make sure that we schedule our timing at the right time to make a more successful network? And so part of this effort is looking at that network and how to build upon and expand it with those mobility corridors you saw before. And how we build that better bus network is through 6 key areas that we have identified through policy. MTC has a policy to provide regional transit service through partnerships with our jurisdictions where we share the costs. We do that with Gaston County and Rock Hill and Union County. But how do we think about that in the greater context of local service, human services type of transit? Technology, how can we see each other in the same scheduling system, in the same apps? Operationally, how do we tie in transfers, make those successful? Financial, that's always going to be a big piece of this. How do you fund that? And interagency coordination, let's just make sure we're talking to one another. And then ultimately, how do we educate and outreach to the community that they know that these connections exist? And I think with that, I'll hand that back over to Michelle to talk about our joint advisory committee meetings, where much of this conversation has taken place and taken form over the next couple of months.
So we have 3 core committees that are looking at this process, made up of elected officials, technical folks, and then community members that represent everything from educational institutions, medical services, and economic development agencies. But later this week, we're actually going to be focusing on rural to urban connections and the importance of mobility hubs where those transit systems can intersect out in the region. But then on June 9th, we're going to be really future focused. We're going to be thinking about implementation, and we're going to be highlighting the report out from our funding and partnerships work group. And they're really looking into how we support implementation of a regional transit system moving forward, and they're thinking about strategies for revenue support. The draft recommendations for the plan will be available in July, and then we'll move through an endorsement process really through the end of fall. Next slide. And so as part of this implementation, we obviously know that funding is important. Next slide. And several projects have already started looking at future funding possibilities, including NCDOT, with their NC First Commission and Charlotte Moves. You know, a lot of folks are diving into what are the possibilities. And so we're coordinating with those groups to better understand what the region's possibilities are. Next slide. And it's super clear. Diversity in funding is important, and each county needs to have a mechanism to support regional transit infrastructure and operations that benefit their county. Next slide. The committee's looking at the current state of funding, but also reviewing some best funding practices from other regions and thinking about how those ideas can be employed here. Next slide. And this just lays out the path to getting our recommendations. We've got lots of technical working groups that are then reporting to our advisory committees. But ultimately, this work will be endorsed by the MTC and also the Central Iowa Regional Council Board by the end of the year. Next slide. And the important part is what happens next. Once you've got a plan, the pieces of the plan will actually go to our transit providers that you heard about, the 17 transit providers. Some of the recommendations and strategies will be implemented by them. Others will go to the region's MPOs. This plan actually has 4 MPO partners. And some of those recommendations will go back to the MTC and also to Central Iowa. Next slide. And our mayors across the region really understand the economic benefits that has been touched on before in this presentation, but benefits to their communities by connecting through transit. They're growing fast. They see the success that's happening in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, and they know that they have workers that need to be in your county, but also need to be in the counties to the north, south, east, or west of them that may be another suburban community. Next slide. And so really just as a wrap up, if there are other groups that you are aware of that you think need to hear about this project, you know, we certainly want to be there and ready to provide information. Through the next few months, we're really doing a whirlwind of presentations out in the different counties in the region. And so we'd be glad to support that. It's been a pleasure working with not only CATS, the MTC, and the City of Charlotte staff, CARTPO staff, on this project. We are core partners moving forward, and we look forward to where this leads us. We will be sending this to you later, and both, Taiwo and John Lewis can also provide this to you as well. But we have an employer choices survey that's going on right now. So we've got to find out from the employers what their needs are related to getting their employees to work. So there's the project email. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also LinkedIn at We Are Central Iowa. So lots of information out there on this project, and we really appreciate your support. And I think at this time we turn it back over to John Lewis.
Thank you, Michelle, Jason, and Geraldine. I thank you for that great overview of the project status thus far. I think I will turn back to the committee. If there are any questions, we'd be happy to engage at this point. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, John. And committee members, if you have your questions, please raise your hands. This work is really critical. I think it is, to me, this is the foundational group for the efforts that really go into talking to our General Assembly in terms of what the needs are in the region. You know, a few years ago, I can't believe it was just pre-pandemic when we did the launch out at, I think it was out at the airport for this group. It feels like it was a lot longer than that. But I think this is really the working group that, to me, needs to be going to the General Assembly and talking about the importance of funding for transit and transportation. The NC First Commission was focused more on transportation, and yes, it talked about buses and things like that, but it was really trying to address the fact that we have a multi-billion-dollar need over the next 10 years just to catch up with our transportation needs, not even to mention our transit needs in terms of this bus connectivity. So when you mention employers, I also want to be sure to include educators. I had the opportunity to go up to the Rowan Kannapolis Community College. I'm sorry, somebody's probably listening that is mad that I have that name wrong. But a couple years ago, and they talked about their Sprinter bus over to the Blue Line, because their internship program, their community college programs, which are unique, are really dependent upon the Charlotte region for jobs for their students. And so they run a Sprinter line, or did at least at the time, to the light rail. And, I think it's things like that, connecting students to job opportunities and internships and between educational institutions, is really critical. So thank you for that presentation. And I think I have Mr. Winston who has a question.
Yeah, if you can go back to the slide about time and money, and just where it shows the trip from the Salisbury area to a doctor in Huntersville. I thought that was right on point. And to answer the question of other companies or systems that I think we should plug into this, we should really look to talk to Atrium and Novant. They are themselves regional organizations that have their own plans around growth. I was able to kind of broach a bit of a conversation last year before the pandemic about this idea. Mr. Lewis and I have talked about fare-free transit, and this is something that the health systems deal with, right? They have to they deal with patients of all types, but my thought was that, and our thought, as I was talking to some of those CEOs, that a patient should never be barred from getting to the doctor because of cost of transportation or access to transit. So how do we start to think about aligning our goals and from a policy and strategic standpoint? Of course, they also have their own rules, their own laws that they're dealing with from the federal government of things that they can invest in and things that they can't. But we need to start kind of aligning their regional approaches to growth to see from a land use, from a transportation, from a transit perspective, how do we all grow together? And I just don't think that we've necessarily thought of it like that. I know they hadn't, but that is, again, how they are thinking. Atrium is not just thinking about folks at CMC Maine, right? They're thinking about their branches in Lincolnton. There's, for instance, they have specific oncology departments that are specialized out there that are necessary for people in this entire region to get to. So how do we start to connect those things? And I think that if the more systems that we can connect with this regional approach, the more solutions that we'll end up finding, and the more funding options that we'll end up dealing with. So we'd love to learn and kind of know these two systems in particular. But as we're having these conversations with our constituents in the business community, how do we get them plugged in, to ideas like that, especially the regional aspect? Mayor Pro Tem made a good point. How do we connect educators and the education system You know, I don't even know how to talk about that from a regional perspective because you have specific different school systems in different places. So definitely taking advantage of those systems that are already thinking regionally.
Thank you, Councilman. I think you have started to peel back some of the layers of how complicated this conversation, this discussion is, and how critical the need is. To your point, the cost of transportation shouldn't be a barrier to someone accessing health care. But as you peel that back, the cost of transportation also is a factor on the cost of health care, because that initial trip that could have been handled at a local clinic may be deferred and become an emergency room trip later. And so all of this is interwoven, and I think as we continue to broaden our net and and bring more people to the table, we start to, number one, identify some of the challenges, and hopefully that'll lead us to some sense of consensus on what the answers are.
Well, and I think also from us as policymakers, if we start to kind of flex our brains to think about this, right? One of the frustrating things about being on city council sometimes is when folks come and want to talk to us about Medicare for all, or access to health care, and things like that. And it seems like that is not necessarily in our purview, but when we actually, if we think about it in the physical sense, you know, there are ways that we can start to think about it, but we don't necessarily know, you know, the most effective avenue to have those conversations or do that work, because, you know, we might not necessarily have been having those conversations in that context, when in fact access to health care is quite literally under our purview when we think about it from a transit and transportation perspective.
Thank you. And again, thanks for that. I think first and foremost, we got to get our General Assembly to focus on our transportation and transit needs, because we worked at NC First for 2 years, and I haven't seen anything come from this session, at least, that would indicate, and if you all have more information, it'd be great to share it, because I just don't see that they're focused on the request to find source to add another $2 billion over the next 10 years to the budget. So
I can just weigh in.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share a couple words on that point regarding the General Assembly. You know, we've been steadily briefing our legislators since January, kind of touching base with them, letting them know that this work is happening and the importance of having them at the table, knowing where we're headed with issues around partnerships and funding. And it's been really great to, see them, whether it's our, generally some General Assembly legislators that represent the rural areas or the Mecklenburg delegation, understand the connectivity and the regional approach and why that's so vitally important. And they've been very receptive to this project and the idea that we're working closely with CATS, with the MTC, and with the city, and that we're trying to speak with one voice as a region on this work moving forward. And just to respond really quickly on the healthcare piece, part of our process is having a joint advisory committee that includes a number of healthcare representatives, and we know that it's going to be extremely important to have the business community in lockstep with us as we think about how to implement these ideas. And I know that in the presentation, you heard a lot of really, really big ideas. Large-scale investments are going to take some time to implement. I think one of the things that we've been very diligent about throughout this entire process is making sure that we have the big ideas as well as the smaller steps that we can take as a region to improve the transit experience of people here today. And so as we talk about the big sexy projects, I don't want those smaller investments that are meaningful for people here and now to be lost in the storytelling around why transit matters.
Thank you, Geraldine. Appreciate that. Thanks, everybody. If we don't have any other comments, then I'll go ahead and wrap it up. Seeing none, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
A second? Okay, with that, we're good. And again, thank you to all the presenters today. Lots of important information. Thank you. Bye.